Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and we are on book 7 of the Oz series, The Patchwork Girl of Oz, and this book is the book that picks up after L. Frank Baum tried very hard to put an end to Oz, to say, listen guys, I've written 6 books about it, and that's it, I'm done. You know, he gave this whole thing at the end of it about how the borders to Oz were closed and no one was ever going to hear from Dorothy again. And then he gets a lot of letters. And this once again goes to show that people giving in to the popular demands of the fans is not a new thing. It's just, fans are... The thing is that time was you had to actually write a letter, whereas now you can, go on Twitter. But the children who had learned to look for the books about Oz wrote many letters asking if the story did not know of some adventures to write about that had happened before Oz was shut out from the rest of the world. And then one of the children inquired why we couldn't hear from Princess Dorothy by wireless telegraph, which would enable her to communicate the historian whatever happened in the far-off land of Oz without his seeing her, or even knowing just where Oz was. And, so that seemed like a good idea, so the historian rigged up a high tower in his backyard and took lessons in wireless telegraphy until he understood it and then began to call Princess Dorothy of Oz by sending messages into the air. Anyways, so, Baum gives in and writes this book, The Patchwork Girl of Oz, which is set after the borders had closed, and does not in fact star Dorothy, though she does play a significant role about halfway through the book. Instead, this is the story of a Munchkin boy whose name is Ojo. He is Ojo the Unlucky, and he lives with his Unc Nunky, and through a series of misadventures, the thing is that they've had to leave home because the bread tree in their backyard is basically out of bread loaves, and there aren't going to be any new ripe ones anytime soon, and they're going to have to go somewhere else if they don't want to starve. So they go and they wind up visiting the Crooked Magician. Now, in a very interesting move, Ozma has declared magic, the doing of magic, illegal in Oz without royal permission. So now, the only magicians, magic workers allowed in Oz's borders proper are supposed to be Ozma, Glinda the Good. The Good Witch of the North has apparently vanished into the ether, more's the pity, and so nothing about her, and the previously humbug Wizard of Oz, who has basically become Glinda's assistant. He now can do magic, but he's kind of there just to sort of back Glinda up and, be her apprentice, sort of, rather than being sort of somebody on his own hoof. But nobody else is supposed to do magic. The Crooked Magician, who lives far and away in these mountains, interpreted the law slightly differently in that he said, as long as I don't make it my job, as long as I don't do magic for other people, I should be able to do magic quietly in my own home. So, indeed, he does magic in his own home, making the magic powder of life, which, as we know, brought to life Jack Pumpkinhead and the Sawhorse and the Gump. And in this case, he had previously used it to bring to life a glass cat, which is very, very conceited, and frankly, I find the whole glass cat's arc very, very disappointing. But the glass cat is, I think, frankly, preferable when she has her bright pink brains that she says, I got bright pink brains, you can see 'em working. She's delightful. She thinks she's better than everybody else, and it makes her a wonderful character, and I'm incredibly sorry that by the end of the book, the wizard has swapped out her bright pink brains for much calmer, clear ones that mean that she is now humble and not obnoxious, which is a pity, because she's better when she's obnoxious. But anyways, he decides that he's going to make his wife a maid. And by that we mean a sort of a living slave automaton thing. And his wife decides that she wants to make sure that her maid is too ugly to go around and won't get ideas above herself. So she takes a patchwork quilt and turns it into a vaguely human-shaped character. And then she's going to give her a limited amount of brains, enough to be a functional maid, but not enough to get ideas above her station. Ojo feels bad for her and takes all of the various powders that would go into making her brains and just, dumps a bunch of random stuff in there, meaning that Scraps, as she becomes to be known, is very clever, though not... that she's clever, not intelligent. And she has a tendency to burst into poetry and is just a wild and wacky, fun sort of person. And when she is brought to life, she accidentally sends a whole bunch of things flying, and at the end of the contretemps that occurs, the Crooked Magician's wife and Ojo's Nunky have both been turned to marble. Well, Ojo is understandably distressed by his only legal guardian, only parent figure being turned into stone, and the Crooked Magician is equally distressed by his wife being turned into stone. So Ojo goes forth on a quest because the Crooked Magician does know a counterspell for the petrification, but it's a counterspell that requires one to get a whole bunch of stuff, and in the meantime, the Crooked Magician is going to stir up another batch of the Powder of Life because he figures, I get started on this, and if Ojo comes back with the things to solve our problem, then that's great, and, I don't have to spend 6 years making it. But if he doesn't find it, then at least I'll get a head start on making my, my Powder of Life, which he would then use to bring back to life his wife and Nunky. Anyway, so Ojo goes on various trials and travails. He meets up with the Shaggy Man. We meet the Woozy, which is a animal that is basically all squares and has 3 hairs on its tail, which are needed for the spell, and believes that it has a terrible growl, which it turns out it does not in fact have, but it can make, fire come out of its eyes when it's angry. So, anyways, they bring the Woozy with them, and they travel to the Emerald City, and the whole thing is slightly more plotty than what we normally get in an Oz book. Partly, I think, because Ojo's quest that takes him to random places and just sort of, this does the travelogue thing, as ever. But because Ojo has a very specific quest that is taking him to specific places for specific reasons, this book, it's not that it holds together better, but it does drive forward a lot more than the other books, which tended to feel a little bit less, directional. But anyways, Ojo gets to the Emerald City. He picks a 6-leaved clover from outside the city, which it turns out is entirely illegal, and he gets arrested and thrown into prison. And the interesting thing is that there are some vague ideas that on the one hand don't work very well in the real world where people are awful, but there are some hints in which, their jail is a place where your freedom is restricted, but it's a very, very pleasant place to stay in, and it belies that notion of, saying, well, we need to punish people who wind up in prison, because in some cases, some people who wind up in prison have actually been through quite enough, and they don't need it to be worse, and there's that vaguest hint of that in this book, along with the pseudo-philosophy of a place where everybody is so nice that nobody ever breaks the law to begin with. Anyways, the reason, of course, why six-leaf clovers were illegal to pluck turns out to have been Ozma doing a runaround, because when she said people can't do magic, they kept on doing it, but it turns out that six-leaf clovers are so essential for doing magic that making it illegal for people to pick them suddenly kept a lid on people doing illegal magic. Anyway, but in the end, she lets him take a six-leaf clover because he has learned his lesson, he is ashamed of breaking the law, and also he wants it not for, some hinky purpose, but to bring his uncle back to life. So Ojo continues on, Dorothy and the Scarecrow join him, and one of the other really interesting things that happens in this book is the incipient romance between the Scarecrow and Scraps, the Patchwork Girl. That the Scarecrow sees Scraps and immediately he falls for her. He just looks at her and says, wow, this is the most beautiful creature I have ever seen. She is radiant and amazing, and it's wonderful because I don't think the books ever make it clear that the two of them are in any sort of romantic relationship, but it's heavily, heavily hinted in this book that the Scarecrow has just fallen madly in love with Scraps, who, decides that she likes him a great deal as well, because they're both people who are made of stuffing, and so they understand each other so very well. Anyway, they go on their various travails and eventually make their way to the Winky Kingdom, because the last ingredient to turn Unc Nunky back turns out to have been a wing of a yellow butterfly, and the problem with taking a wing off a yellow butterfly is that, of course, the Tin Woodsman, having the most tender heart of anybody could ever have, objects to the idea of pulling the wings off poor innocent creatures that have never done you any harm, and so they can't get their one wing of a yellow butterfly, and Ojo has to go back to the Emerald City in despair because he's done all of these things, he's gone on all of these adventures, and he hasn't been able to save his uncle. Well, thankfully, Glinda comes through in the clutch and uses her superpowers to turn Nunky back, and everybody lives happily ever after. Boy, I can't talk. Happily ever after. It is a bit of an artificial ending, in particular because, of course, by this point we know that Glinda has her magic book that allows her to read about everything that is happening in the world, and she's been following this the whole time, and one feels a little like she could have, of course, just shown up and saved everybody the headache and trouble, and chose not to. But I suppose, given that she knows everything that's going on in the world, she's probably learned enough that she just has to keep out of it because she'd drive herself crazy trying to save everyone and everything. But in the end, Unc Nunky gets turned back, and everybody lives happily ever after, and we can all imagine Scraps and the Scarecrow having some kind of a wild and wacky stuffed people romance. Because I kind of adore the implications there. Anyways, Scraps is wonderful. She's wild and crazy and a very, very firm friend to Ojo. She just latches onto him and will defend him right to the hilt. She will lie on his behalf because what's important to her is taking care of her friend, and she's a little bit morally hinky, but you'd never find a better friend, that she is absolutely a real friends help you, friends help you move, real friends help you move dead bodies. She is absolutely the friend who will help you move the dead bodies. So, I think that's everything that I've got to say on this, so we're coming up on the end of my time, and I will see you all next week.